Walk into any private bank's client lounge, any members-only club dining room, any boarding school reunion where 3 generations of the same family are standing in one room. And you will notice, if you know what to look for, that almost nobody of real, old, inherited wealth is wearing a Rolex. Not because Rolex isn't a superb watch, it is. Not because it isn't expensive, it certainly is. But because a Rolex, in the specific social grammar of old money, says something its wearer usually doesn't want said out loud. I bought this to be recognized. That single distinction, recognized versus known, is the entire subject of this video. This isn't hidden. It's just never taught, because the people who understand it best have absolutely no incentive to explain it to you. And the people selling watches have every incentive to convince you that a big logo on a wrist is the pinnacle of taste. We're going to walk through 7 watches and, more importantly, 7 reasons that define how multi-generational wealth actually approaches horology. Along the way, we'll cover the economic theory of conspicuous versus inconspicuous consumption, the actual documented histories of watchmaking houses stretching back to the 1700s, and precisely why the most expensive watch in a room is very often the one nobody there notices at all. The semiotics of time. Why a Rolex is a new money signal. Let's start with theory, because without it, the rest of this video is just a list of brand names. In 1899, economist Thorstein Veblen published The Theory of the Leisure Class, introducing the concept of conspicuous consumption, the purchase of goods specifically for the social signal their visible cost sends, rather than for their functional value. A Rolex sits almost perfectly inside Veblen's framework. It is instantly recognizable at a glance, even to people with no interest in watches at all, because its case shape, bracelet design, and crown logo have been marketed globally and consistently for decades. That recognizability is not incidental. It is the product's core commercial strength. Rolex has built one of the most successful luxury brands in human history, specifically by making its watches legible to strangers. And that is precisely the quality old money instinctively avoids. Sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's concept of cultural capital, developed across the 1970s and 80s, offers the other half of the explanation. Bourdieu argued that genuine inherited class position is demonstrated not through visible expenditure, but through taste, knowledge, discernment, and preferences that cannot be bought quickly or displayed obviously, because their entire value lies in requiring insider knowledge to even recognize. A brand logo requires no expertise to decode. A movement architecture, a case finishing technique, or a 2-century-old manufacturing lineage requires exactly the kind of specialized knowledge that signals someone was raised inside that world, rather than someone who recently arrived in it and is still learning its vocabulary by buying the loudest available signifier. This is the mechanism behind what's often called quiet luxury, though the phrase undersells how old the underlying logic actually is. It isn't a recent minimalist trend. It's the same instinct that has governed old money dress, home design, and object selection for centuries. Never display the price. Display only that you already know what matters, and let people who share that knowledge recognize it, while everyone else simply sees a nice watch. A Rolex in this framework is not a bad watch. It is, in fact, an excellent entry point, mechanically sound, well-built, holds value reasonably well on resale, but it is the watch equivalent of a monogrammed logo bag, instantly legible, aggressively marketed, and status signaling to an audience that doesn't actually need convincing. Old money is rarely trying to convince anyone of anything. It is, by definition, already there. With that theoretical foundation in place, let's go through the 7 watches and the 7 distinct mechanisms that actually define this world. If the idea that a luxury brand's marketing success can actually work against its status value is new to you, that's exactly the kind of counterintuitive mechanism this channel exists to unpack. Subscribe now, because every watch we're about to cover builds directly on this theory. Watch 1, the Patek Philippe Calatrava. If there is a single house most associated with old money horology, it is Patek Philippe, and specifically not its complicated grand complication pieces, but its simplest model line, the Calatrava. Founded in Geneva in 1839, Patek Philippe remains to this day one of the very few major watchmaking houses still independently owned by a founding family, currently the Stern family, who acquired the company in 1932 and have run it across multiple generations since. That continuity is itself part of the brand's old money appeal. It is not a subsidiary of a conglomerate's watch division. It is a family business that has made the deliberate, repeated choice to remain one. The Calatrava, introduced in 1932, is a study in restraint. A round case, a plain dial, thin hands, no complications beyond simple timekeeping. It is by design the least ostentatious watch, a house capable of producing extraordinarily complicated timepieces chooses to make its signature model. That is not an accident. It is the entire philosophy distilled into an object. Patek Philippe's own advertising, running since 1996, built its identity around a single, now famous line of copy, that you never actually own a Patek Philippe, you merely look after it for the next generation. Whatever one thinks of the marketing itself, the sentiment describes a genuinely different logic than most luxury goods operate under. The watch is explicitly positioned as an heirloom object, something acquired not for the wearer's own status display, but as a piece of family infrastructure intended to be handed down, decade after decade, generation after generation. This is the first mechanism worth naming clearly. Old money buys objects designed to outlive the buyer. A Calatrava purchased by a grandfather in the 1960s, worn by his son in the 1990s, and passed to a grandchild today isn't simply an old watch. It's a physical artifact carrying 3 generations of family history on a single wrist. That is a category of value no amount of brand recognition can replicate, because it cannot be purchased instantly. It can only be inherited, which is precisely the point. Watch 2, Vacheron Constantin. The second watch takes the same logic even further back in time. Vacheron Constantin, founded in Geneva in 1755, holds a widely cited claim as the world's oldest continuously operating watch manufacturer, meaning it has produced watches without interruption for nearly 270 years, surviving the French Revolution, 2 world wars, and every economic collapse in between. What makes Vacheron Constantin such a precise example of the old money logic is how little most people outside horological circles have ever heard of it, despite that staggering continuity. The brand has never pursued the mass-market visibility strategy that built Rolex's global recognition. Its dials often carry the Maltese cross emblem, the company's historic symbol, adopted in the 1880s from the cross-shaped component used inside pocket watch mechanisms, rendered small and unobtrusively, never as a dominant design element. Its most historically significant collector's pieces, such as those in its Métier d'Art line, showcase traditional decorative techniques, hand guillochage, enamel work, engraving, that require years of specialized apprenticeship to execute, and that are, again, essentially invisible to anyone without the specific knowledge to recognize what they're looking at. A guilloche dial pattern, hand-engraved using an 18th century rose engine lathe, looks to an untrained eye like a nice textured watch face. To someone raised around this specific category of object, it is instantly identifiable as an enormous investment of specialized craft time. This is the second mechanism. Old money frequently prizes continuity itself as the primary status marker, rather than any single design element. Wearing a brand that has operated without interruption since before the founding of the United States carries an implicit statement about permanence and survival across historical upheaval. A value system entirely consistent with the multi-generational governance and thinking in centuries mindset we've covered in earlier videos on this channel. 2 watches in, and already the pattern should be obvious. None of this is about spending the most money. It's about understanding what most people never learn to look for. If you want the rest of this list, along with the full mechanism behind each, stay with us and consider subscribing so the next deep dive lands in your feed automatically. Watch 3. Lange Söhne. The third watch introduces a genuinely dramatic historical story, one of watchmaking's great destruction and rebirth narratives, and a powerful example of how old money values not just heritage, but survived heritage. Lange Söhne was founded in 1845 in Glashütte in the Kingdom of Saxony and became one of the most respected German watchmaking houses of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Then, in the closing days of the Second World War, Allied bombing destroyed the company's factory. In the years that followed, under East German communist rule, the company was nationalized and absorbed into a state-owned watchmaking collective, effectively ceasing to exist as an independent brand for over 4 decades. It was only after German reunification in 1990 that Walter Lange, a descendant of the company's founder, re-established Lange Söhne as an independent watchmaking house, rebuilding essentially from scratch both the physical manufacturing capability and the brand's reputation, drawing directly on archival documentation of the original 19th century designs and techniques to rebuild in continuity with the pre-war company, rather than inventing something entirely new. This is the third mechanism, and arguably the most emotionally resonant one for old money sensibilities. A demonstrated history of surviving destruction and rebuilding with fidelity to the original is itself a form of prestige. It mirrors, almost exactly, the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves dynamic we've discussed in the context of family fortunes. The families and institutions that command the most respect are frequently not the ones who never suffered a setback, but the ones who can document a documented collapse, followed by a disciplined, faithful restoration. Modern Lange Söhne watches are also produced in extremely limited numbers, relative to major Swiss houses, use in-house movements finished largely by hand, and, in a detail collectors particularly prize, often feature a hand-engraved balance cock, a small decorative component visible only through a transparent caseback, meaning the finest piece of craftsmanship on the entire watch is specifically designed to be seen only by the wearer or by someone who takes the watch off their wrist to look. That is inconspicuous consumption in its purest, most literal form. Watch 4. Breguet. The fourth watch takes us back even further to the origins of several mechanical innovations still considered foundational to fine watchmaking today. Breguet was founded in Paris in 1775 by Abraham Louis Breguet, a watchmaker whose innovations are still cited constantly in horological history. He is widely credited with inventing the tourbillon mechanism, patented in 1801, a rotating cage designed to counteract the effects of gravity on a watch's accuracy. Originally developed for pocket watches, and still, over 2 centuries later, considered one of the most technically demanding complications a watchmaker can produce. Breguet's historical client list is itself a matter of documented record. The house famously produced an extraordinarily complicated pocket watch. Commissioned in 1783, according to the brand's own historical account, reportedly for Queen Marie Antoinette of France, that took over 4 decades to complete, well after both the Queen and the watchmaker had died, and is now displayed at the L.A. Mayer Museum for Islamic Art in Jerusalem following its theft and eventual recovery in the 2000s, a saga itself well documented in horological and true crime literature. What makes Breguet relevant to this list isn't fame by association with a single historical figure, but the deeper pattern. The house's identity rests on documented technical firsts, not marketing campaigns. Its watches today still carry design details directly inherited from the 18th century. The Breguet hands, a distinctive hollow-tipped hand, design the founder himself originated, and the Breguet overcoil, a specific balance spring geometry he developed to improve accuracy. Both details recognizable only to someone with specific horological literacy. This is the 4th mechanism. Old money frequently values documented technical originality over brand visibility. The difference between owning a watch because a company invented something foundational to the entire industry versus owning a watch because its logo is widely recognized on the street. We're at the halfway point. And if you've caught the thread running through every single one of these, continuity, invisible craftsmanship, documented history over brand recognition, that thread runs through literally everything we cover on this channel. Subscribe and drop a comment telling me which of these 4 has surprised you most so far. Watch 5. Cartier Tank. The 5th watch is a genuine departure from the round case tradition of the previous 4, and it introduces a different mechanism entirely. Designed so historically significant, it transcends the need for a visible logo altogether. The Cartier tank was designed in 1917 by Louis Cartier, reportedly inspired by the aerial view of Renault tanks deployed on the Western Front during the First World War. Its rectangular case and parallel vertical brancards, or sidebars, directly echoing the vehicle's tread and chassis silhouette. It remains, over a century later, in continuous production, and its design has changed remarkably little across that entire span. Itself another example of the continuity mechanism we've discussed throughout this video. The tank's historical association with old money and establishment culture is extensively documented rather than speculative. It has been worn across the 20th century by a wide range of documented public and historical figures across politics, film, and aristocracy. Its rectangular, resolutely non-flashy silhouette, functioning as a kind of quiet uniform among a certain stratum of American and European elite for generations, largely because, unlike a round sport watch, it reads instantly as a dress accessory rather than a status trophy, even to observers who have no idea what brand they're looking at. This introduces the 5th mechanism clearly. Shape and silhouette can carry as much old money signaling power as brand name or mechanical complexity. A rectangular case, worn on a simple leather strap, photographs and reads in person as understated regardless of the wearer's net worth, which is precisely why it has remained a fixture of establishment style across a full century of otherwise dramatic changes in fashion, celebrity culture, and luxury marketing. Watch 6. F.P. Journe, the sixth watch, belongs to a completely different category from the historic houses covered so far, the modern independent watchmaker, and a mechanism specific to the most insular layer of watch collecting culture. F.P. Journe is the name of both the watchmaker and the brand he founded, launching his own independent manufacture in 1999. After building a reputation, restoring historically significant antique timepieces, and eventually producing his own tourbillon movements by hand. The brand has deliberately maintained extremely limited annual production, a small fraction of the output of the major historic houses, and produces nearly all of its own components in-house, including hairsprings, an unusually vertically integrated approach, even by high-end watchmaking standards. What makes F.P. Journe relevant to this discussion is that recognition of the brand functions almost entirely as an insider signal. Its dials are marked discreetly, its case designs are elegant but unshowy, and its collector base is disproportionately made up of people already deeply immersed in horological culture rather than casual luxury buyers. Owning one signals, in effect, that the wearer is operating inside a network of knowledge most people, including many wealthy people, simply don't have access to. This is the sixth mechanism, and arguably the purest form of Bourdieu's cultural capital theory applied to a modern product. The smaller and less commercially marketed the brand, the more precisely it signals insider status to the only audience that matters, other insiders. A watch that means nothing to 99% of people who see it, but signals immediate specific recognition to the 1% who understand exactly what they're looking at, performs a completely different social one watch left. And it might be the most important entry on this entire list, because it's the one that costs the least money and carries the most weight. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about the mechanisms behind this world rather than just the aesthetics, which means you're exactly who this channel is built for. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Watch 7. The Inherited, Unbranded Family. Watch, the seventh and final entry on this list, is not a brand at all. It is, quite simply, a grandfather's watch, a father's watch, a watch with a case back, engraved with initials, and a date that has nothing to do with the year it was purchased retail, because it was never purchased by the person wearing it at all. This is, in many ways, the purest expression of everything covered in this video, and the one hardest to explain to anyone raised outside this specific culture. The single highest status watch in old money culture is very often one with no resale value, no collector recognition, and no brand cachet whatsoever, because its entire value is that it cannot be bought at any price. It can only be given by a specific person at a specific and usually significant moment, a graduation, a marriage, an inheritance following a death in the family. And that transmission is the entire point. There is a useful contrast worth drawing here with an entirely different category of independent watchmaker, the Swiss house H. Moser and CA, a small, independent manufacturer founded in 1828 and revived in its modern form in the 2000s, has built an unusual reputation specifically by mocking the logic of conspicuous logo-driven watches, releasing pieces with completely blank dials, and, in one widely covered marketing campaign, an advertisement directly critiquing flashier competitor watches by name. The brand's contrarian positioning is, in effect, an explicit, self-aware articulation of the exact philosophy this entire video has been describing implicitly. The dial with nothing on it is making a very specific, very legible statement to the right audience, precisely by refusing to say anything to everyone else. The inherited family watch takes that same logic to its natural conclusion. It requires no marketing campaign to make its point, because its owner isn't performing restraint as an aesthetic choice. They are simply wearing the actual, literal, physical evidence of who they come from. There is no more complete expression of quiet wealth than an object that quietly proves inherited continuity without a single word of explanation required. This is why, if you ever do see a Rolex on the wrist of someone from a genuinely old family, it is disproportionately likely to be a decades-old model, worn without ceremony, often visibly scratched, not the newest release, polished and photographed. Even within a brand built on visibility, the old money instinct reasserts itself. Wear it until it's simply a part of you, not a statement you're making today. 7 watches, 7 different mechanisms, and exactly one consistent thread running underneath every single one of them. The watch that matters most to old money is never the one that tells a stranger how much it cost. It's the one that tells the right person, without a single word, exactly who you are and where you came from. That isn't a secret. It's simply a language most people have never had a reason to learn until now. If this changed how you look at a wrist the next time you're in a room full of money, that's exactly the kind of shift this channel exists to create. Subscribe for the rest of the mechanisms behind how old money actually signals and doesn't signal its wealth, and I'll see you in the next one.